particularly OWASP. So I think that the OWASP Foundation has been putting in a lot of very good things out there in order to how to develop and deal with the problem of application security. So instead of trying to come here and provide something that I would do on my own, I decided to leverage things that already exist in the OWASP, and I've provided on top of it some of my expertise and my delivery mechanisms to use. But again, I'm a big fan of open source. I think there's no point in people in 2019 to every time trying to rebuild the wheel from scratch. There's a lot in the community, and the OWASP particularly has been putting out a lot of good content that can be reused, so I've decided to take that approach for this particular talk. So this is, we'll be talking exactly about pushing left, what that means, and so we'll be covering some application security foundations. Just very quickly to provide a bit of background of where I come from, because I probably have a different type of experience from probably many security professionals. So I got an interest in security in the late 90s, so that means I was 13 years old when I knew I was going to work in security. So I've been at this for a while, and I've seen everything that the industry has come to. Obviously, as a 13-year-old, my immediate interest was hacking, as obviously it has to be when you're 13. So I've had a lot of different roles in security. I started as a sysadmin. I was a trainer. I was a pen tester for a couple of years. Going back to something that Nick was talking about previously, the way I got my first pen tester role was because I got hired as a sysadmin, and I just told my boss there are 1,100 ways I could hack into this company right now. He asked me to prove it. I proved it, and I got a role as a pen tester. So I worked in marketing, so I was a product manager for a while. I did security operations, security engineering, spent probably a bit more time than is healthy in the telco space, dealing with network security, etc. I've had different roles of managing security teams in operations, managing managers as well, governance, risk and compliance, and I've been consulting for a while now. I'm the founder of Privacy Beacon, so it's my own consulting company, and I'm also the director of cybersecurity for Brightlight. As I mentioned, I'm a huge believer in open source, so I've contributed to Hacker High School, which is a security awareness for teens, teaching them how to hack, how to get interested in security, but mainly focused on the type of language that a teen would be engaged with. I've contributed to ISO 27 standards, and I've contributed also to a number of open source projects, GPR patterns, which is now graph risk, so a way to create maps from your risks and your incidents, etc. So it's an interesting way to visualize security information. And I've been doing lately, there are my details at the end, but I've been doing a lot of work on applying worldly mapping, which is a business strategy approach in how to apply security, how to develop security strategy from applying worldly mapping. So I mentioned all of that. I don't particularly like to talk about myself, but I think I've got a particular view into the security world because I've done kind of all of the above. I've done hands-on a lot of the typical security roles that exist out there. So going back to the question that was asked previously, it's actually the first slide. So what is pushing left? So as developers and testers, which is the title of this meetup, you usually go through a process, right? You start by identifying requirements, you go through a design phase, you develop the code, then you do your testing, and finally you release it into production. What security left, if you kind of draw it like that, pushing left is exactly what it means, is that a security should be more up to that side. The more you do security on that side, the cheaper it is, and typically the better it will be. Now, I'm sure that as developers and testers, let's all agree that the requirements that you probably get from the security team are less than fuzzy, right? Or more than fuzzy. And sometimes it's not very clear from the types of use cases that you're getting on how you're actually going to implement them or why they are important. So a big part of pushing left is making sure that people, that the teams that are most involved at the beginning of the process, that they can understand what it means to them, and they can understand what is it about their role that is important for the security of what they're building. Okay. So, the earlier we get into it, the better we're going to be. So it's not just inviting the security team earlier into the process. The security people are not always the most approachable. That's what my experience tells me, and what I get as feedback from many other developers and testers. But it's understanding what it is that we can do early on so that it gets less expensive to deal with after the fact. We'll get back to this in a bit with another analogy. So what we're going to be talking about today is about the foundations of application security. So what are the things that we can do in order to ensure that we are building secure applications? There isn't, this is meant to be the basics, so hopefully, so for anyone not very familiar with security jargon, hopefully you can get away some ideas, and I'm going to be talking about some specific tools and how to set up a lab if you want to, on how to get more, some more hands-on information on how to do application security. If you're a bit more advanced, hopefully you will learn about a thing or two of things that you can probably start thinking or you can actually start doing in order to, let's say, improve your security game. And finally, if you're already well versed into security, hopefully I can give you an idea of how to structure an application security program so that you can help your organization deal with application security as an holistic thing, as the way you do things and not as something that we deal with when it goes wrong. So what is the current state of affairs? So yeah, everyone's getting hacked. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Nick already mentioned a few examples. I'm just going to mention two quick examples that are kind of been on the news and are relevant to application security. So one of them would be last year's breach on Best Buy. Okay. So which was basically the online chat solution, their solution provider. They integrated with an online chat provider, and they got hacked as a result of that. The BA, British Airways, hacked as well. So they were using a JavaScript library called Modernizer, and they basically, there was a name change on where the data was going to. They changed the URL, and that's how they got hacked. So making sure that things that are happening in the industry and understanding what are those pain points, what people are getting hacked with, is always useful on understanding the types of strategies that you need to come up with. So the current state is that we, and this is kind of a broad definition of we, so I would say that maybe many InfoSec professionals are still looking at the problem the wrong way. Right? We're still too focused on our network security, on having our TLSs in place. We're still too focused on our perimeter security. We're still focused on the security of our infrastructure. When it's typically around the fourth, those are the latest stats that I've seen, a fourth of the breaches that are happening have something to do with your application security, not necessarily the other parts. So I think, generally speaking, in the more we're moving towards a declarative world where everything is code, where we now have serverless applications coming in, the more and more we need to be building not only in InfoSec professionals, but also among the developer and testing community. We need to be developing the application security skills. Right? So if you know nothing about security now, this is probably an unpopular opinion, but I would say there is little point in spending way too much time focusing on learning infrastructure security, right? Because we know that problem is going away. What I think personally that developers and testers should be looking at is the things, what is coming in as the next set of skills that you're going to have to help your organization succeed. Okay? And that is looking at applications and understanding how applications work. So in just a kind of built phrase out there is that these days identity is the new perimeter, right? The perimeter being how you put your firewalls and your DMZs, that world is mostly gone by now, right? the way you manage identities, not only from your users, but also between the services that communicate with each other, that is moving forward where most of your bang for buck should be focused on, because that's what people are getting tripped on. So what is AppSec? Application security. So this is the Wikipedia version, which I quite like. So application security encompasses measures taken to improve the security of an application, often by finding, fixing, and preventing security vulnerabilities. So each of us in our roles will probably have an exposure to at least one of them, or probably more to one than the other ones. But this is what application security is, okay? And the breadth and the scope it needs to take. So I quite like Tanya Janca. So she was the one who originally built this this presentation for OWASP. I quite like her definition as well, which is a bit less technical. So AppSec, it's any and every activity that you perform to ensure that your software is secure. So the current state. So unfortunately, as Nick was mentioned, so I won't be spending much time on it. Unfortunately, we're still seeing a lot of so thinking about the timeline of how to the software development lifecycle, we still have a few fuzzy requirements at the beginning, and then we've got a penetration test that is usually performed at the end. So as most of you will know if you've been at your jobs long enough, what that typically means for organizations is that at the 11th hour, we're going to get a pen test report with a couple of red things that are going to be there, and one of two things are going to happen. Either you've got some very let's say, diligent management team that can work around schedules or what may be the case, and you get those reds fixed before you go into production. Okay? That's usually the best you can hope for. Or if not, you're going to go into production with a few reds that shouldn't be there. Right? The problem with that, and what I'm not saying, is all of the amber and green things that you could have fixed very cheaply at the beginning if they were worded correctly and raised either at requirements or design stage. That's going to be your technical debt from now on. Right? And you're probably always going to be carrying that technical debt until. Yeah, you're probably always going to be carrying that technical debt until you completely change your architecture, right? At least that's, being at this for almost 20 years, that's usually the experience that unfortunately I have to share. So typically what security professionals are concerned with is this triad that probably all of you have seen at some point. So it's about confidentiality, available, and integrity. So just to quickly summarize and make sure that everyone's on a similar page to what those mean. So confidentiality means that only people authorized to see a piece of information should be able to see that information. So that implies there are two characteristics that should be employed by most of the things that are developed. People need to be authenticated. You need to be sure that there's a way for people to say this is who I am. In a secure way, and they need to be authorized. They need to be authorized. You need to ensure that they can only perform actions on the system that they have been explicitly allowed to perform. Availability, it's about the systems being there, right? So I'm sure everyone will easily understand that. Integrity, it's about making sure that the data hasn't been modified from the state that it should be. So it means ensuring that we've got mechanisms, usually what's called also non-repudiation, where if someone cannot be in the position to say they didn't do something, right? Because you're going to hopefully have logs, you're going to have a trail of information that can give you some certainty that a certain person has performed a certain action. So just going back to this slide with an analogy. So pushing left, a very good analogy is thinking about building a house, right? So let's say you're going to build a 3-story house, and you've got 6 people in the household, right? 2 adults, 4 children. Someone thought fuzzy requirements, right? Again, someone thought it was a good idea to build that house with one bathroom, right? Suddenly, you're 2 months away from having the house finished, and you get your head, well, that's not going to work, is it? But for 6 people in the household, we've only built one bathroom, it's really not going to work. So at that point in time, you're so far down into your design, you're so committed into everything having been built to a certain standard, that you're not going to build good bathrooms, right? You're going to be taking space from your cupboards, from your kitchen, from all the other things that you had designed to fit your requirements, and you're going to need to find a way to fit a couple of bathrooms in there, right? And it's going to be expensive, and it's going to delay your project, right? So pushing left is exactly that. Is making sure that your requirements are so clear and well defined at the front stage that you can do security cheaply, and you can make sure that it gets ingrained in the way people think about the problems that they're facing, right? About designs, about the trade-offs in the designs that you need to make, etc. So the like a boss aspect of it. So pushing left like a boss means that you're going to think about how you're going to make it scale. You're going to think about how you are going to formalize some of those activities that we'll be talking about next, and you're going to be thinking about how can I ensure that I can do this not just now, but that this is the way we operate from now on. So thinking about some high-level activities and how you can integrate them into the conversations you have with your stakeholders, in everything that you're building. So this presentation takes a bit of a potentially unexpected turn, but we're going to phrase how to approach an AppSec problem from a meal perspective. So we're going to have a main course, so the things that you should think about being the default of what you do. We're going to think about a gravy, so some additional things you can think about, and we're going to think about dessert, so the things you don't really need, but if you're mature enough and you still have some space in your belly, some things you can think about. So what is the main course? So with regards to the main course, is some of the things that you're probably already familiar with. So you can start doing some vulnerability scans and some vulnerability assessments. So that's usually something that is relatively cheap to do in 2019. So there are ways that there are some vendors that charge an arm and a leg for some vulnerability assessment solutions. You also have some open source alternatives that can be used. So the typical difference between a vulnerability scan and the vulnerability assessment is that usually on a scan you would typically do this periodically, and you typically just define a target, fire the tool at it, get a report, and then hopefully have a process whereby you assess how severe they are and then work with the business to fix them. So a vulnerability assessment is usually has more than one tool involved, and you will typically look for a specific problem that you want to do. So let's do a vulnerability assessment specifically on cross-site scripting attacks or across our applications. And you have that very specific scope. You try and bring a couple of different security tools. You develop or find some proof of concepts that you can apply to see if it's not just a false positive, but you deal with it in a more targeted way, let's say in a vulnerability assessment. On secure code reviews, this is something that this is not, it's not portrayed like this in the original version of this talk. This is my opinion of where you should start, just pointing that out. But especially in a DevOps world, I think there are 3 things that I believe are critical and should be a baseline of how you start your application security program. The first one is make sure that all those dependencies of things that you're looking on the internet to use, that they don't come with unexpected vulnerabilities. Okay, that's the number one of the first things that I like to implement. The other one is secrets management. So ensure that you're not putting codes directly in the code, that you have a way to manage secrets at scale, and that it references a variable and it's going to get the data from somewhere. But try to ensure that you're not, don't do secrets directly in the code. There's a long history of people getting that wrong. And finally, some static code analysis tools. I'm going to be talking about a few examples. Again, open source, but obviously we've got commercial solutions that do all of that, or at least they claim they do. So that's one place that I like to start. The other thing is about threat modeling. So as it was mentioned previously. So threat modeling is about, so I'm going to talk in a bit more detail afterwards, but I quite like, and that also aligns with the way Jeff talks about threat modeling, which is kind of one of his expertises, I can say. He has a company around it, so he would know. So I quite like how Adam Shostak, who is the, a brilliant guy who wrote the threat modeling book, which is one of the most read books on threat modeling, he puts it quite simply. In at least 95% of all threat modeling techniques or approaches that I've seen in the market fit into the framework that he built. Right? And the framework is really simple. You need to ask 4 questions. Right? What are we building? What can go wrong with it? What are we going to do about it? How good of a job have we done? Right? So any threat modeling, all of the threat modeling techniques, approaches, frameworks, call it whatever you want, typically they follow these 4 things, right? What are you building? What can go wrong with it? Yep. What are we going to do about it? And how good of a job have we done? Right? So whilst you go through some of more technical details, and if you want to do some research on ways to threat model, just remember these are really the 4 questions. Right? And within the scope of what your role is as a developer, as a tester, as a project manager, whatever may be the case, these are the 4 things to keep in mind if you're going to be doing some threat modeling. And there is also just something else I'd like to add. I don't think that necessarily security people are the best people to be leading, to be doing some of the threat models. The security people have the background to understand how threats work, but if you're the ones doing the building and doing the testing, you're going to be uniquely placed to actually understand what can go wrong with it. Right? It's not so unless you're kind of Jeff and a few other like 200 people out there who actually started their security career, started as developers before they went into security, there aren't many people out there in the market right now. Right? So the type of information you're going to get from your security team, it's not their expertise. And if you can understand how to word things in a way that will, answering these 4 questions, in a way that will go back to the frameworks that they use, you're going to have a much better chance of actually communicating and having a good conversation with your security teams. And finally, the usual pen test, right? So someone comes in at the end, and then they throw everything they've got at the tool, everything they've learned, as Nick was telling us, and then you're going to get a report that hopefully you'll be doing something about it. So this should be applying both to custom applications that you're building and to commercial off-the-shelf things that you do, because yes, you are buying the product, yes, someone else is responsible for developing it, but if you get hacked because one of their problems, it's going to be you on the news and not them, right? Because you are the one, especially in the new world of GDPR, you need to be thinking about your supply chain, you need to be thinking about how secure your suppliers are, and have a program in place to ensure that you're managing that risk appropriately. Which, again, it may be a problem of the risk team, the compliance team, the security team, but you can help them make an informed decision, because another thing that I think is a kind of a truism, the people closest to the problem always have an opinion that is worth considering. And if you're the ones developing the code, if you're the ones developing the quality assurance tests, you've got an opinion that someone should be listening to. So, the gravy now. I'm told that this is a Canadian dish called poutine. That is basically chips with cheese and gravy. Sounds good. I don't have a problem.
Curd, actually.
Yeah. Sorry?
It's curd.
Curd?
It's a special kind of cheese.
Okay.
It's French Canadian.
Okay. So looks good. Anyway, the gravy. So those are kind of the basics. Ideally, you'd be doing more than that. So that means educating developers on secure coding practices. I'm going to share with you at the end of the talk, I have a few slides with some of the resources that you can use if you want to understand more what that could mean. So with workshops, talks, lessons, having engagement with the security teams, etc. So establishing some secure coding standards. Okay? So that is applying, so I'm going to show you at the end as well. So a particular project that is the most, I think the most mature project in OWASP. So the Open Web Application Security, what's the P stand for?
Open Web Application Security Project. Yeah.
Project, yes. So at the end, that is called ASVS, so Application Security Verification Standard, that even does a level thing. So you start at level 1, then you go to level 2, and then to help you with maturing your AppSec program. The other thing is about responsible disclosure. So that is something that would need to be worked with your security teams to make sure that you've got a way to engage a standard set of rules to engage with anyone that addresses your organization saying, I found a way to hack you. Right? So having a few rules in place on how you're going to deal with that situation, so that's always good to have. And the other part is having a secure code library and other reference materials. So especially in a DevOps world, but not necessarily. So in the Agile and other methodologies of developing software, you can still do this. But the basic idea is having, not reinventing security stuff every time you're working on a new project, but instead creating a library that is accepted internally, that you can use, reuse security components across all of the software projects that your organization is doing. And finally, the dessert. So I would say this is the more advanced stuff, so I've seen firsthand companies fail trying to do this, especially on the bug bounty side of things. Right? So rule of thumb: if you know of vulnerability assessments that are coming in with 100 plus things that you should be fixing, you're not ready for a bug bounty program, right? Because what's going to happen is sorry, I probably should have started elsewhere. So what a bug bounty program is there are a few organizations out there that get you hackers for hire, right? And basically what it happens is organizations start a paid program with these, let's say, hacker collectives, and you get up to, you can define rules, etc., but you can get up to 30,000 different hackers trying to hack your application, right? And what it happens is then like payments and the management of the relationship with those hackers happen through the bug bounty program provider, and then you usually establish a bounty payment of X amount for the different severities of vulnerabilities you find. So if it's something that could lead to a breach of your whole customer database, there'd usually be a high rate, and it's going to, you'd be expected to be paying more for that type of program. Right? And you are the one as a company that define what those rates are. Right? So that also drives how interested hackers will be in hacking your application. So if you set your P1, let's say, full data breach bounty to £500, you're probably not going to have many people interested. Right? So, for instance, some of the, there have been, and this is, I think, a brilliant thing that is happening in the industry, but more and more compared to 2014 and 2015, we are getting bug bounties that are actually worth people doing. So some really critical flaws have been rewarded with £1.5 million. Right? That's now happening for some of the bigger organizations. And the reason why I think this is brilliant is that we are finally, as an industry, decreasing how much a hacker wants to go rogue and wants to go to the criminal side of things. Because people usually, people that have the skill, if they know they can find a vulnerability and sell it on the black market for $1 million or $5 million, they're going to do that, right? If you're only offering them £500 on your bounty program, guess what's going to happen, right? It's a no-brainer. So finally, we are getting some of the bigger organizations understanding that doing their bit, because it's also important for their reputation, for them, for how secure the systems are, and are upping up the ante of how much they're paying out for the really critical flaws. So that's what a bug bounty program is. So because of the nature of how it works, you need to ensure you're ready before you go into something like that. If you've got vulnerability assessments that come up with a lot of things, you're not ready, take care of your other stuff first, and then when you're more mature, and you've got and when you know that your organization as a whole can identify vulnerability and fix it within 3 to 9 months, generally speaking, something medium or high, then you're probably ready to go on to a bug bounty program, but I would say not before. So capture the flag context. This is really good in the way that developers and testers, so in organizations that are doing this, can get more involved with security. Because what this is usually a security team that promotes these types of events. They will open internally, they will say for a couple of days or a day, whatever may be the case, and they will put a version of an application up for their developers, their internal teams, trying to hack it. Right? So you have a bit of fun. You've got a day where you're all trying to hack your own applications, etc. At the end of it, someone will win. You get a prize, whatever may be the case, and it gave you as developers or testers an opportunity to do real-world type security work, get a bit more knowledgeable in security. And if you're thinking about, and I'm going to be talking a bit more at the end of it. But if you ever think about it, going into the security field, because we desperately need developers and testers to be coming to this side, you're going to be kind of getting a good stepping stone, not only for your current employer, because you can show you've got some skills that they could leverage, but it's also something that will certainly look good on your CV, that you can, if you go elsewhere, that you can say, I've participated in X number of CTF contests, and I got some good results out of it. Red team exercises. So there are different schools of thought on what the red team exercise is, but I'm going to talk about here the more encompassing one. So typically red team exercises focus on 3 things. It's basically finding a way, any type of way, to hack into your organization. So it can be, it typically has 3 types of scope. Your cyber scope, so your technology, all those kinds of things. It can have your physical scope, your buildings, your CCTV systems, whatever may be the case. And it has your social scope. Right? So your phishings, your calling into your contact centers and trying to see what information they can get if they get it into. So a full, let's say, red team type exercise can encompass all 3 aspects. Cyber, physical, and social. Yeah? Again, it's an advanced technique. If you're falling over because you haven't patched stuff, you probably have other things you should be worrying before worrying about that. So how do you push left? So this is where I try to bring it hopefully more to the audience on a dev and test perspective. So this is another thing that I've added to the original content, which is use Docker. Right? So a lot of you may already be familiar with Docker, containerization. Most of the tools, especially open source tools that you can start using, go on to OWASP or go onto the internet and start using, most of them typically work on Docker right now. You'll typically have Docker images that already have all of the dependencies, have all of that. So if you want an easy way to start into getting more familiar with security tools, go to the Docker Hub. I'm going to talk about a few names of things that you can use next. But it's the simplest way to add security into the thing that you do. As a developer, that you can do a few tests without having to worry about dependencies, libraries, any of that. You just bring the Docker container and you run the test that you want from there. Or even integrating them directly into your pipeline, also knowing that you just need Docker, right? All of the dependencies will be there. You just need to call out the tool that you want, understand how you're going to get the results back in a good open source or any tool will support some kind of CLI or at least output in JSON or whatever may be the case so that you can use it elsewhere. And then you can work on those results and take it from there. So the first thing I would suggest is get a training lab, right? If you want to understand more about security, you need to understand what security looks like, right? And have a bit of a hands-on understanding of how things work. So I would point you to DevSecOps Studio, which is an open source project that already has a lot of security tools that you can start using straight away. Right? So basically all you need is Vagrant, VirtualBox and Ansible, and then you run the install of DevSecOps Studio, and you've got access to all of these tools. Right? So you've got Nmap, which is just a core scanner. You've got Metasploit, which is a package that allows you to add some payloads to actually do kind of proper hacking through modules, etc. So you can have a go. So you will have other applications like Juice Shop from OWASP, which is an application that is purposely built with a lot of flaws, so that people can easily test the cross-site scriptings, the easy hacks, so you can get some hands-on understanding of those. So you can use Juice Shop, use the Metasploit from DevSecOps Studio, and have a go at starting to experience some hands-on hacking. Then are some static analysis tools. So Brakeman, all of these are open source. So Brakeman is, for instance, to check for secure dependencies when you're developing on RubyOnRails. Bandit does the same thing for Python. Findbugs does the same thing for Java. So you've got some of these tools that you can check if you're using dependencies that have known vulnerabilities or not. Then you've got the Zap proxy that Nick talked about previously. So, which is one of the ways that I think, especially for testing communities, it's probably one of the easiest ways to start integrating security into your pipeline, because the way Zap works is it's just a proxy, but you just make sure that the traffic goes through Zap, and you can start getting some actual feedback and telemetry of how secure your applications are. Then for hardening, we're going to talk about it just quickly later. You've got Ansible and Chef and other things that you can use to do some hardening. Compliance is in spec, so compliance as code, so really simple syntax that you can start building, and you've got stuff already made for use, like hardening standards, etc. And then it's just the basic stuff, like you've got GitLab CI, Jenkins, then Elasticsearch for monitoring log, and it comes built with AWS CLI, so you can add tools to it live if you want. But this is, so as part of the training that DevSecOps Studio provide, you can have the AWS CLI and start playing with that as well. So I mentioned practicaldevsecops.com. So there is a paid course. So I did the online, the hands-on, the face-to-face version of that training. So the trainer is Imran Mohammed. He's from Singapore. Probably one of the smartest people I've ever met in my life. He's really good. And as of for the past 6 months, he's now has this as online training. It's paid for, but it's really good content. So what this means is so pushing your code left. Again, going back to using a proxy, something like Zap, so that your traffic can go through, and it's the seamless way of doing it. So the word of caution is always make sure that that you've got permission to all of those things. Otherwise, your security team or someone else may come after you. So just the word of advice. So in terms of threat modeling, so we talked about it, the 4 questions, right? So what are we building? What can go wrong with it? What are we going to do about it? And how good of a job have we done? So all of threat modeling is typically based on these 4 questions. But it's basically a brainstorming session with the people that are closer to the problem that can figure out some negative use cases. So the things that people shouldn't be able to do and how would the application or whatever we're building work with it. So on code reviews, again, we talked about some of the tools using static code analyzers. Make sure that you're doing some kind of threat modeling. And this is probably a more advanced comment, but just for kind of to make sure that I put it out there. So whenever you do threat modeling, you should be avoiding adding to your threat model things that you know you're already covering from a requirements perspective, because you're just wasting time. Right? If you know that some of your security requirements are quite good in a particular area and you're covering them through requirements, so most further left, you shouldn't be doing it at the design stage on a threat modeling session, because at that point you're just wasting time. So make sure that you use your time bound, etc. on your threat models to look for the threats that are actually relevant. So on writing better code, so this is making sure that you've got some more information on how to do things securely. And this is where I think one of the best resources that you have from OWASP are the cheat sheets. Okay? So basically you've got this, so if you go to the OWASP cheat sheet series, you've got a list of about 40 different types of things that you've got a cheat sheet for. So if you want to make sure that your application, either from a development perspective or when you're doing the actual quality assurance tests, that you don't have, that you're looking for cross-site scripting, you've got a cheat sheet here telling you exactly what it looks like, exactly what you should be looking at. Right? So you've got over 40 of those that you can use in your day-to-day job if you want. I'd like to make sure, let's do this month, let's see if we are, how good we are with the cross-site scripting. Right? Go here, create a couple of scripts, and do this incrementally. So other resources. So the whole of OWASP is really good. So I really like open source, as I've mentioned. So OWASP ASVS, what I've told you before, the Application Security Verification Standard. So you've got even government organizations, both in the UK and the US, using this standard. It's open source, it's really good. There's, yeah, you shouldn't be buying snake oil from vendors. This is good, very, very good. So this also gets you into some levels. Okay, so starting at level 1, once you've got it figured out, you go to level 2 and then on to level 3, and it gives you a path on how to mature your approach. This is, sorry, I'm kind of running out of time, so I'm going through a bit of this, but this is one that I think a resource, if you go check one resource, I think this should be the one. Right? So so this is devsec.io, and what it does is inspec is a compliance as code tool that if you are building tests, quality assurance tests, this can check for how things are secure when you're building things. Okay? So basically you do inspec, you've got all of these baselines. Right? So you want to do SSH appropriately. You have Docker or Kubernetes. You want to check the how hardened they are. You've got your Linux, Windows. You've got some databases, Apaches, Nginx. If you use any of those projects, what you can do is literally take it off the shelf, go have an inspect profile that does that checking for you. Right? As with anything, you don't necessarily need to use continuous integration in order to use these tools. It's typically easier if you're already down that path, but you can add these checks manually to whatever development process you're following. But you can check compliance as code with inspect, and you can actually fix so do the provisioning in a secure way, meeting the exact same baseline using Ansible, Chef, or Puppet. And you just go to the website, you just download the scripts, and you file them, right? All done for you. Not much technical expertise required. So it's one of the, so the combination of those two I think is really powerful, because on one hand you can make sure that everything that you're building is being built in a compliant way, and when it actually gets provisioned, you're also deploying it in the hardened way. This is another project, so Tanya Janca, who built the original version of this talk, she's the leader of it. So it basically talks about CI/CD, so how to do security in DevOps on the CI/CD pipelines. It's an interesting project, and they also do some talks every couple of weeks on
interviews.
Sorry?
And interviews.
Yeah, and interviews as well. So they've got some very good content. And she's also keeping this list up to date. So she's always adding some more content there. If you want to get started in application security, that's a good list of resources that you can use. So then these are some of the details from Tanya. If you want to follow her, she has some very good content, so I would advise you to do that. And this is me, and also my contacts. So I've been very vocal on Twitter and LinkedIn for the past month or two. I'm developing a few more, a few things that are kind of novel that people haven't been really talking about. So I think you should definitely follow me. So just before closing, that was supposed to be the end of the presentation. I'm just going to spend 1 minute talking about the slide. So this is something that I've been developing. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the conversation, I've been doing some application of Wordly Map, which is a business strategy, a way to develop business strategy, and I've been applying some of those concepts on how to develop security strategy. So forget about the map itself. It could take another session like this to explain the full thing. What I'd like you to focus on is that here in purple, we've got what is the current accepted practice. So, i.e., what your security team is probably doing and what they're really good at right now. Here in blue, you've got what is coming up as the practices that are now being asked of us, security professionals from the market. And over there, you've got a view of how security is going to be embedded into everything that people do, because we're starting down the road of building resilient systems. Right? So, as you know, like the Netflix and the Facebooks, etc., they've got some pretty good handle on what their security is and why. It's not because they're building security, it's because they're building resilient systems, and resilient systems are secure. Right? So a lot of security professionals are still concerned about the speed that things are happening right now, these days, but what I've been arguing with a lot of people for a long time is no, that's the other way around. We should be the champions of that. Because resilient systems, by their very nature, they're secure. We just need to make sure that we understand how resilience is built into those systems, and make sure that the security flavor is added on top of that. But security is no longer the big game in town, resilience is. Okay? That's why we've got Docker, that's why we've got ephemeral systems, that's why some of these big organizations have systems that are up for 10 minutes. Right? And then they get brought down, and another one like that is coming up. They don't care anymore. Right? We're building resilience, and security needs to be embedded in that resilience. The reason why I brought this slide up with this new kind of research that I've been doing is that I think that the community of developers and testers are uniquely positioned to become security professionals now and coming into the future. Because you understand this better than 90% of security professionals out there currently understand it. You've got skills in applications, you've got skills in DevOps. Asking those 4 questions and taking some of the kind of black magic out of threat modeling, right? I'm sure any of you could tell me at least 10 things. If I asked you those 4 questions on a one-to-one, you could tell me 10 things that you could improve on your security right now, right? You are unique because you understand code, because you can code, you are uniquely positioned to create things that are going to build the resilient systems that the next decade is going to require of us, of all of us as designers, of all of us building systems for organizations. So this is kind of my way of trying to say, if you also not only look at what is currently happening, but also what's coming next. So automated threat modeling, which Jeff has a company just focused on that. Once you start thinking about using the cloud native features to build secure systems, so not just the security bolt-on in paying 100K or 200K a year for commercial vendors to give you your security, learning how to use the cloud native features to build secure and resilient systems. And also applying some of the things we've been talking about, but I still need to spend at least a lot more time doing, is applying safety engineering principles into how we build, how we address security. So not the guacamole, that's what Nick was alluding to, that the security industry has been kind of guacamoling security stuff for the past 25 years, and it's not working, right? Because they keep coming up and they keep hammering them down, right? We need a fundamentally different approach to how we build secure systems, and I believe that is through applying some safety engineering principles for things like national grids, electricity grids, like nuclear power plants, etc. Those are the principles that people are building, that are creating, and the approaches they're taking into how they engineer systems that take care of worst case scenarios. Right? And I think in the next decade, we are going to start seeing some of those practices emerge, and we're going to start applying some of those safety engineering principles into how we build everyday software, let's say. And that is me. Thank you very much. Any questions? No questions.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mario. That was awesome. If you'd like to take a 5-minute comfort break, and then we'll come on to Jeff. Thank you, everybody.
Sorry.